I've been asked what I felt when I opened that garage door. People want to know if I dropped to my knees, if I screamed for help, if I lost 20 years off my life right there on the concrete. The truth is simpler and colder than that. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. But by the time the sun came up the next morning, what I did to my daughter's husband, most folks would call it ruthless. I call it overdue. Let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, you'll never understand why I slept just fine that night. Better than I had in months, actually, once it was all done. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years married to a woman named Carol before I lost her to cancer 6 years ago, and since then, my daughter Melissa has been the only family I've got left that matters. Melissa is 31. She's smart. She's kind. She's got her mother's laugh, the kind that makes strangers in restaurants turn around and smile without knowing why. 3 years ago, she married a man named Trent Loeb. Good-looking guy, good talker, the kind of smile that made you want to trust him before he'd said a word worth trusting. His parents, Roy and Deb Loeb, seemed pleasant enough at first. Roy had a handshake, like he was trying to prove something, and something in my gut, the very first time I met him, said, "Keep your eyes open with this one." I ignored it, same as most fathers do, because your daughter's happiness has a way of quieting the voice that knows better. 11 days ago, I flew down to Tampa for a real estate closing, a small strip mall property I've owned since 1994. Nothing dramatic, just business. I handle a couple times a year in person because I like looking a man in the eye when money changes hands. Melissa knew I was going. Trent knew. The whole family knew. What nobody knew, including Melissa, was that the closing wrapped up 2 days early because the buyer's financing cleared faster than expected. I could have stayed in Tampa, sat by the hotel pool, eaten some seafood, made a little vacation out of it since I was already down there and paid for. Instead, I booked a flight home that same afternoon. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. 34 years married to Carol taught me that surprising the people you love is one of the last free pleasures a man gets to keep, and I never stopped liking it, not even after she was gone. I landed a little after 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, grabbed my one bag, and drove myself straight from the airport, not home, but to Melissa's house, because I wanted to see her face when I showed up unannounced. That's the kind of thing I do. Now here's the first detail I need you to hold on to, because it matters later. When I turned onto her street, I saw Roy's truck, that oversized black Ford he drives like it's compensating for something, parked crooked in Melissa's driveway, taking up space for 2 vehicles like he owned the place. I felt that same old itch in my gut. I told myself maybe they'd just stopped by. Family does that. I was tired from the flight and reading too much into a parked truck. I parked at the curb, walked up, and noticed the side door to the garage was cracked open, which was strange, because Melissa always kept that door shut, always. Ever since a raccoon got into her garbage cans 2 summers back, and she swore she'd never let it happen again. The house itself was quiet up front, too quiet. But from around back, through the fence gate that was also standing open, I could hear voices, laughing voices, relaxed, unbothered laughter, the kind you only hear from people who believe nothing in the world is currently wrong. I walked toward that laughter instinctively, the way you walk toward any sound that doesn't match the silence surrounding it. And that's when I looked through the cracked garage door on my way past. Just a glance, nothing more, and I saw her. Melissa was on the garage floor, not standing, not sitting in a chair. On the concrete, her back against the side of her own car, her knees pulled up, one hand pressed against her scalp, and blood, dark red, matting through her fingers and into her hairline, running down the side of her face in a thin, steady line. Her phone was on the floor beside her, cracked screen face up, useless. I felt my whole chest cave in on itself. I have known my daughter's face through fevers, through heartbreak, through the day she buried her mother and stood at that graveside looking more like a little girl than a grown woman. I have never, not once in 31 years, seen her look at me the way she looked at me in that garage. Relief and terror all mixed together, like she'd been holding herself together through sheer will, and the second she saw me, some final wall inside her just came down, like she'd been waiting, like some part of her brain had been counting the minutes until somebody who loved her walked through that door. I did not freeze. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man who freezes. I dropped my bag, crossed that garage floor in about 4 steps, got down on my knees beside her, and called 911, with blood already on my hands from checking the back of her head. While the dispatcher walked me through keeping her still, keeping her talking, keeping her from closing her eyes, I could still hear them out back, laughing. My daughter's husband and his mother and father, laughing over what sounded like somebody's grilling story, like it was any other Wednesday afternoon, like Melissa wasn't 15 feet away from them bleeding onto her own garage floor. I want you to sit with that for a second. I had to. The paramedics got there in 9 minutes. 9 minutes that felt like 9 hours. 2 of them came through that garage door fast and steady, the way people move when they've seen real emergencies enough times that panic isn't part of their process anymore. The lead paramedic, a woman, maybe 40, name tag said Alvarez, checked Melissa's pupils, checked the wound, checked her blood pressure, and looked up at me with an expression that told me plenty before she opened her mouth. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice low and even, "this is a significant head laceration. Based on the swelling and her pupil response, I'd estimate she's been down at least 20, maybe 30 minutes. Somebody should have called us the moment this happened." She said it professionally, no accusation in her tone, just fact laid out flat on the table for anybody willing to hear it. I looked toward the backyard, where the laughter had gone dead silent sometime in the last 2 minutes, and I felt something inside me shift from hot to something else entirely, cold, still, focused. I held Melissa's hand while they got her stabilized enough to move. She squeezed my fingers, weak but there. I squeezed back. Twice. Same as always, since she was 6 years old and scared of thunderstorms. Then I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the backyard because it was time to handle something. Before I tell you what happened next in that backyard, you need to understand something about who I am. I am not a loud man. I don't throw things. I don't put my hands on people. I don't make scenes. But I am, without a single doubt, a man who handles his business, and standing in that garage doorway, I had already decided how this particular piece of business was going to go. I've walked into plenty of rooms in my life, boardrooms where a handshake was worth more than a signed contract, hospital rooms where I sat holding Carol's hand during her last weeks, funeral homes, courtrooms, church basements after tragedy, rooms that changed everything, and rooms that changed nothing at all. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for walking into that backyard. Trent was standing at the grill with tongs in his hand, like a man without a single care on earth. Roy was sprawled in a lawn chair with a beer sweating in his fist. Deb was scrolling her phone, laughing at something on the screen, a plate of half-eaten burgers on the patio table between them like they'd settled in for the whole afternoon, in my daughter's backyard. While she bled on the garage floor 15 feet away, I stood in the gate for a moment. Just stood there. I've learned across 67 years that the most dangerous thing a man can do when he's furious is speed up. Every animal instinct tells you to raise your voice, move fast, make them feel the size of what they did in real time. But slow is worse. Slow tells people you've already made your decision, and nothing they say from this point forward is going to change it. So I stood there, slow, quiet, and I looked at Trent. He put the tongs down the second he saw my face. I'll give him that much. Some part of that 33-year-old brain of his understood immediately that something had shifted that I already knew. You don't set down a pair of tongs like that unless some part of you already knows. "Walter," he started, "I can explain." I held up one finger, just one, and he stopped talking. I turned to Roy first. Roy Loeb, thick neck, sunburned forearms, the kind of man who'd never done an honest day's manual labor but talked like he had calluses. He had his beer resting on his knee like he was settling in for the evening. I looked at him for a long moment before I spoke, and I kept my voice so level it probably scared him worse than shouting would have. "Get out of my daughter's house," I said. Roy blinked. Deb lowered her phone. Trent opened his mouth. "Walter, if you'd just let me." "I'm not talking to you yet," I said, still calm, still slow. "Get off this property, both of you. Right now. Roy shifted in that lawn chair and did exactly what I expected him to do. Tried to be the reasonable one, tried to be the adult in the yard. He leaned forward, set the beer down with exaggerated care, and said, "Now, Walter, let's all just take a breath here. There's no need for—" "Roy," I said. He stopped. "I didn't ask for a breath. I didn't ask for a discussion. I asked you to leave, and I'm only going to say it once more." Deb grabbed her purse off the patio table without another word, touched Roy's arm, and gave him that look. "Wives, give husbands. That means we are leaving right now. Don't make this worse." Roy stood up slow, the way men do when they want you to believe they're leaving because they decided to, not because they were told to. As they walked back through the side gate toward their truck, they passed close enough to the garage to see through the open door. Melissa on the stretcher now, a gauze wrap around her head already going pink, an IV taped into her arm. Alvarez and her partner working with quiet efficiency around her. Deb stopped mid-step. Her hand flew to her mouth. Roy went completely still, staring. I watched the color drain out of both their faces in real time. Good. I needed that image burned behind their eyelids for the rest of their lives. They left without another word, and Roy's truck screeched a little, pulling away from the curb, which told me everything about the state he was leaving in. Then it was just me and Trent, standing in that backyard with a grill still smoking behind him and a plate of burgers going cold on the table. He had his hands jammed in his pockets, jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite get out. I walked over to the patio table, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from where he stood. "Sit," I said. He sat. "Talk. I want all of it." He exhaled, dragged a hand down his face, and started talking, and what came out of his mouth over the next several minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about that afternoon. Trent told me that Roy and Deb hadn't just dropped by for a casual visit. They'd been planning this for almost a month, waiting specifically for a stretch when I'd be out of town, because Roy had gotten wind, somehow, that I was finalizing paperwork on that Tampa property, the one I'd already told Melissa and Trent would eventually be part of her inheritance decades down the line, once I was gone. Roy had convinced himself that once I was out of state, closing on a related deal was the perfect window to pressure Trent into signing something. Actual documents Roy had drawn up himself, with a cousin who dabbled in real estate law, that would name Trent as an immediate co-owner on a different property of mine, my primary rental duplex here in town, transferring partial control while I was 1,000 miles away and couldn't stop it in time. I want you to sit with that, really let it land. These people came into my daughter's home, sat at her patio table eating her food, and tried to manipulate her husband into signing away a piece of what I'd built over 4 decades, while I was out of state and my daughter was in the next room. I kept my face flat while he talked. Inside was an entirely different story. "And Melissa," I said quietly, "where does she fit into this?" Trent looked down at the table. She came out to the garage to grab something from her car, and Roy followed her out there, still pushing the paperwork angle, telling her she was being paranoid, that it was a formality, that it protected the family. She told him no. Flat out no, Walter. She told him it wasn't his to push, and it wasn't mine to sign, and that you'd handle your own estate on your own timeline. He paused. Roy got loud, really loud, and Melissa got loud back, and then Roy, he shoved her, I think, or she stumbled backing away from him. I don't even know exactly. And she went down and hit her head on the corner of the workbench. And I heard it. I heard the sound from out here. My hands, folded on that patio table, did not move. "You heard it," I repeated. I thought she was okay. I thought she'd get up. He was struggling now, voice cracking around the edges. Roy came back out, looking pale, and said she was fine. Just needed a minute. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. And then Mom said something about the burgers, and I went back to the grill. I don't know why. I don't know why I went back to the grill, Walter. I sat with that for a long moment. The backyard was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the ambulance's idling engine out front. Then I said, "So let me understand this correctly." My voice had changed, and even Trent noticed, straightening slightly in his chair like a man bracing for weather. Roy's father shoved my daughter, hard enough to put her on the ground with a head wound, and your response was to go check on the burgers. Trent didn't answer. You heard the impact, I said. You knew she went down, and you went back to the grill. I didn't think it was serious, Walter, I swear. She has a pacemaker, I said. You know that. You've known that for 3 years, since before you married her, since the surgery when she was 26. A blow to the head isn't a small thing for her, and you know it isn't. The paramedic, a stranger who's never met my daughter in her life, understood the urgency the second she walked through that garage door. And you. I stopped myself, because I felt it. That particular kind of grief that hits a man when he realizes the person he trusted with his child's happiness was never built to carry that weight in the first place. I stood up. I don't know who's been shaping you these past few years, I said, but he is not the man my daughter married. I walked back into the garage, took Melissa's hand as they loaded her into the ambulance, rode with her to the hospital, and didn't say another word to Trent that night. But understand this. My silence wasn't surrender. It wasn't me letting it go. My silence was me thinking, calculating, deciding. And when Walter Briggs goes quiet like that, when he gets very, very still, that's exactly when a man should start worrying. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 in the morning, after the hospital's released your daughter with 11 stitches and strict instructions about concussion symptoms, after you've gotten her settled into her own bed, with the lights low and a glass of water on the nightstand. After you've sat in the chair beside her bed for 40 minutes, just listening to her breathe evenly, finally, mercifully evenly. That's not a peaceful quiet. That's a heavy quiet. The kind that presses down on your ribs and makes the refrigerator hum and the wall clock ticking sound louder than they have any right to be. I sat in that quiet a long time, thinking about Carol, about how she used to say that Melissa got her stubborn streak from me and her soft heart from her mother, and how I'd promised Carol at the end, sitting in that same hospital I'd just left tonight, that I'd take care of our girl no matter what it cost me. Then I stopped thinking, and I started moving. I drove home, went into my study, sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and went to work. Understand something about me before I walk you through what came next. I am not an impulsive man. I don't act in the heat of the moment, and I don't do things I have to undo later. Every single decision I made that night, I had already made in that backyard, sitting across from Trent with my hands folded flat on the table and my face completely still. By the time I sat down at that desk, I wasn't angry anymore. I was decided, and there's a world of difference between the two. The first call went to my bank at 3 in the morning, because when you've held accounts as long as I have and you're the primary holder, there's a number on the back of the card that never sleeps. I've used that number twice in my life. This made 3. Trent had been an authorized user on my Platinum card for 4 years, ever since he and Melissa bought their house, and I'd added him on, for emergencies, for convenience, for trust I'd extended without ever once auditing it. Home improvement charges, that fishing trip to Michigan he called a guy's weekend, groceries, gas, all of it, removed. The representative on the phone, calm and professional, asked if there was anything else. Not tonight, I said. Thank you. 4 minutes, done. Next, the boat. I owned a 22-foot center console down at the marina that Trent had free use of any time he wanted, an arrangement going back 3 years, no fees, no restrictions, just family being generous with family. I had the marina remove his name from the authorized user list before sunrise and changed the gate code that same morning. Then the business. This one took longer, and it mattered more than anything else I touched that night. 2 years ago, when Trent had talked about wanting to get into property management, I'd brought him on part-time at my rental company, teaching him the ropes, giving him a modest salary, and floating the idea, just an idea at that point, nothing formalized, that he might eventually take over day-to-day operations of the duplex portfolio once I slowed down. I called my attorney at 6:30 that morning and left a voicemail. I need every piece of documentation regarding Trent Loeb's involvement in my rental properties formally terminated, effective immediately. I want it airtight. I want it done by end of week, and I want language added that makes it unmistakably clear he has no claim, implied or otherwise, to any future transfer of ownership. Call me when you're in. Roy Loeb would never, in this life or any other, get within legal shouting distance of anything I'd built with my own two hands over 4 decades. Every month for the past 3 years, quietly, without ceremony, I'd been depositing $1,000 into an account Trent and Melissa shared, meant to help with their mortgage while they got established. It had started as help. It had become habit. Nobody had ever discussed it out loud. We'd all just absorbed it as part of how things worked. I logged in at 4:15 and canceled the recurring transfer. Permanently. Not paused, not reduced, canceled outright. I sat back in my chair after that one, because that transfer represented something bigger than money. It represented a version of Trent I'd been quietly financing, a cushion, a safety net that let him make the kind of choices a man makes when he knows somebody will always be there to catch the fall. Not anymore. Then came the calls I will never apologize for. Across my career, I'd made introductions for Trent, opened doors at the county assessor's office, vouched for him with 2 different contractors I'd worked with for 20 years, put my name on the line more than once, because he was my daughter's husband, and that used to mean something. There's a particular kind of currency that takes decades to build and lives entirely inside other people's trust in you. I'd spent a good bit of mine on Trent, gladly, without a second thought. That morning I started taking it back. I called 4 men I'd known since before Trent was even born. I kept it simple, no drama, just facts. Trent would no longer be operating under my name, my endorsement, or my backing, and any courtesy they'd extended on my behalf should be considered finished. Every one of them asked if I was all right. Every one of them respected the call, without pushing for details. That's what 40 years of keeping your word buys you. People who trust that if Walter Briggs is making the call, Walter Briggs has his reasons. By 6 that morning, I'd had the locks changed on the duplex office, pulled Trent's access badge from the storage unit facility, and sent a certified letter to Roy Loeb's home address informing him that any further contact regarding my properties, direct or indirect, would be handled through my attorney and treated as harassment. I made myself coffee, stood at my kitchen window, and watched the sky go from black to gray, to that pale, indifferent blue that means morning is coming, whether you're ready or not. Trent showed up at my house at 9:30. I watched him from the front window, saw him walk up with his shoulders set the way a man sets them before a conversation he's dreading, saw him try his key in my front door, which still worked, since I hadn't bothered locking him out of my own house, only out of everything else. He knocked instead of walking in, which told me something had already shifted in him. I opened the door and stood in the frame without inviting him further. "Walter," he said, "please, I need to explain. I need you to understand I never wanted any of this." "You knew about her pacemaker," I said. "You heard her hit the ground, and you went back to the grill." He didn't have an answer for that. Nobody would. "I love my daughter more than anything left on this earth," I said, "and right now, loving her means making sure the people around her understand that actions have weight. You're not a bad man, Trent. But you let yourself become somebody who checks on burgers before he checks on his wife, and I can't hand you the keys to anything else until that changes." "For how long?" he asked, and his voice cracked in a way that reminded me, uncomfortably, of the earnest, nervous kid who'd asked my permission to propose 3 years back. "Until you become the kind of man who doesn't need to ask me that question," I said. "That's on you now, not me." I closed the door, gently, no slam, no drama, and walked back to check on Melissa, who was sitting up in bed, morning light across the bandage on her head, looking pale but present, looking like herself again. She looked at me for a long moment. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I sat on the edge of her bed, took both her hands in mine the way I used to take her mother's hands, and said, "It's handled." She studied my face, searching, the way she used to when she was little, and wanted to know if I was telling her the truth about the tooth fairy. Then she nodded slowly and leaned her head against my shoulder, careful of the stitches, and I sat there with my daughter for a long while, not saying anything else, because nothing else needed saying. Outside, somewhere across town, Trent was standing in a driveway with a rejected key, a canceled card, and the particular silence of a man realizing every comfort he'd taken for granted had a foundation, and that foundation could be removed. Inside, I held my daughter's hand And for the first time since I'd looked through that cracked garage door, I let myself breathe all the way out. Some folks listening to this will say I went too far. That family should forgive faster. That money and access shouldn't be weapons. Maybe. But I watched a paramedic, a total stranger, treat my daughter's injury with more urgency and more genuine care than the man who promised to protect her for the rest of her life. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, sitting at that desk, I decided the last real gift I had left to give Trent wasn't unlimited patience, it was consequences. He'll either become the man Melissa deserves, or he won't. But she is safe, she is healing, she is home, and at the end of the day, that's the only outcome that was ever going to matter to me.